All right, hello, welcome. We're just about to get started, so hopefully you're here for a wonderful event. Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to UQ Library. My name's Jeff Cruz. I'm the acting university librarian, and I really wanted to thank you for joining us today. So we have a fantastic panel today that we've titled Degrees of Disruption, a critical conversation on learning in the age of AI. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet here at UQ's beautiful St. Lucia campus. On behalf of everyone present, I'd like to pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. As part of our discussions, I have recently read about the March 2025 communique that came out of Envisioning Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders AI Futures Conference. And it talked a lot about being grounded in Indigenous data sovereignty, Indigenous protocols for AI, and Indigenous cultural and intellectual property principles. So I just also wanted to recognize that Indigenous peoples are always the authority for their knowledge and data wherever it's held and used, and have the right to determine its proper governance. I also wanted to really express my firm and proactive commitment to supporting efforts for greater diversity and inclusion, both within the library and across UQ. Today's a really great example of where we're looking at diverse perspectives. And we hope that both the audience and our panel will bring some really great perspectives, both in person and online. So conversations about AI like the one we're having today are really enriched by that range of perspectives. So we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. If you haven't seen already, we do have a Mentimeter survey. So if you haven't, please use your phone to take that QR code. There are some staff members walking around, as well as a QR code there on the screen. You're welcome to submit questions for the panel through Menti, but we'll also have a roving mic if anyone has any questions during the Q&A part of the event. As we go throughout today's event, we will be showing some of the answers from the Mentimeter on the screen, so please keep your eye out for that. So let's get started. I'll start by a few introductions. So welcome Professor Kelly Matthews, who's an award-winning teacher who works with future teachers and university academics to make learning more inclusive, engaging, and real. Now a professor of higher education with a research record to match, she started her UQ journey in student services, co-creating programs for students who too often are left at the margins. Kelly brings smart, passionate people together to tackle messy challenges like AI in education and building classrooms where everyone belongs. She lives in Brisbane with her partner, who's a mathematician at Griffith, and two curious primary schoolers who keep her honest. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Professor Jason Tangen, who is a cognitive scientist and professor in the School of Psychology at UQ. His research explores how artificial intelligence can help people learn more effectively, think critically, and avoid common misconceptions. Jason leads projects on AI-driven tutoring, bias-aware assessment, and the psychology of misinformation. He advises organizations, including international agencies such as the FBI, on making better decisions in high-stakes situations and using AI tools responsibly and effectively. Thanks, Jason. We also have Professor Deborah Brown, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Queensland, is also the director of the University of Queensland Critical Thinking Project, is a principal practitioner for critical thinking at the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation, and a fellow of the Australian Academy of Humanities. She leads professional learning and research collaborations with Prep to 12 schools, departments of education, and government and non-government organizations to embed critical thinking within education and leadership training, and coordinates academic capability building programs for marginalized school students. She is currently engaged in a student-staff partnership project to gauge students' responses to using AI in courses in structured ways to practice their critical thinking. Welcome. And we have UQ Environment Officer Megan Barkin. who's a fourth-year student studying the Bachelor of Engineering and Master of Engineering, specializing in civil and environmental. She's passionate about protecting the planet through her mix of problem-solving and nature-based knowledge. Through her background in engineering, she strongly believes we need the support of every industry to face this global threat and enjoys building and contributing to climate-based communities. She's currently representing students as a UQ Union Environmental Officer and has loved the opportunity to organize schemes and events which push UQ towards a greater standard of sustainability and bring students together. So thank you for your time here today, and I'm looking forward to your insights and perspectives on the challenges and opportunities presented by the use of artificial intelligence in higher education. So we'll ease into the conversation with a few quick questions for the entire panel. So one thing that we've asked through the Mentimeter is, how do people feel about AI? And so we have some things there. We see a lot of people are curious about AI. Some people are concerned. Some people are cautious. But turning to the panel, in one word, how would you describe your feelings about AI right now?
I'd say I'm quite anxious. I'd say that's my one word.
Anxious?
I'm optimistic.
Optimistic?
Yeah, I'd go with optimistic.
I feel okay about it.
So anxious, optimistic, and okay, right. And another quick question also in our Mentimeter, just a quick yes or no question. Have you used AI today? And if yes, for what?
Yes, I have. I definitely find it is helpful if I've exhausted all my options and I still don't understand a concept, that it can explain something very clearly and concisely.
I will say no, because I have been with students or teaching since 7 a.m. this morning. So I have not checked in with AI today. But in the last week I have.
I would say yes. I was also teaching 3 hours this morning, but we used it throughout the class. But also we're renovating our bathroom at the moment, and it's incredibly useful at interior design and lighting design, and take a photo of a space and have it visualize exactly what it's going to look like under a whole variety of conditions. We use it a lot.
I have used it today. I use a lot of voice to text because I'm a very terrible typer. So I've trained a bot on the ways that I like to write emails, and then I just talk into it and it translates it for me. And then I read it. If I'm happy with it, I shoot it off. And I've done probably some 10 emails that way today.
Nice.
So we've kind of seen that we have been using it in a variety of different ways. Some of us have been busy most of the morning, so haven't. And some of the ways are quite creative, you know, thinking about remodeling, but also in terms of our everyday sort of work. So my first question is for you, Jason. As someone who experiments a lot with AI tools, what's one clever or unexpected way that students could be using AI right now to boost their learning, but maybe aren't?
Yeah. So a lot of people are using AI as chatbots, as just almost like ChatGPT when it came out in November 2022. It wasn't very smart at the time, but you're kind of interacting with it the same way. But it's come a long way since then. And you can think about it less as a chatbot and more in terms of how to transform information from one form to another. So the way that students could potentially use it is one of the most powerful learning methods to increase the rate of learning, but also memory for the content, is called retrieval practice. And so it's actually, it's like flashcards. So it presents information in a way that you study it, you put it away, and then you come back to that information again and again. And it kind of solidifies it in memory and you remember it for longer. But AI is perfect for that, right? You can actually take entire chapters or lecture notes or whatever you'd like, put it in and have it converted into retrieval practice friendly formats like flashcards or an interrogator in a way that would actually make you slightly uncomfortable. But that's the entire point, to make it harder for you to kind of just reread it or skim it or just highlight the kind of information which has been shown not to be very effective at all.
Right. And so that touches a little bit on critical thinking, thinking about how might students use it critically. So I'll turn to you, Deborah. There's a lot of debate around whether AI might undermine students' ability to think critically. Is there evidence that over-reliance on AI has negative consequences on students' ability to think critically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that over-reliance on AI is negatively correlated with critical thinking. And you know, including in studies by Microsoft, right, which is responsible for Copilot. So, you know, in this field, there does seem to be this kind of negative correlation. I think it has to do with, I mean, the best explanation for this is that it's a kind of cognitive offloading. And the danger whenever we sort of engage in cognitive offloading is that the skill will atrophy. And this has actually been a worry. You might be wondering why I'm optimistic then. But I think there are ways that we can interact with AI that can actually augment critical thinking rather than atrophy it. But this has been a worry for a long time. So, I mean, going back to Plato, you have these worries about writing and reading, that writing and reading was going to atrophy our memory, but also that it was a passive form of learning. And of course, nowadays we laugh at this. You know, think of all the great advances that we've had since the printing press, you know, and just being able to preserve knowledge. You know, but we are in this state where we do have to take this evidence seriously and think about ways we can mitigate the threats to our critical thinking.
And just to kind of ask a further question, why does critical thinking matter to students?
Right. Well, I mean, that question is kind of like asking, you know, why truth matters. So I think there's actually two answers to this, or possibly three. So, I mean, critical thinking just, you know, is the kind of only hope that we have for being able to sort of recognize the difference between poor and good reasoning. So essentially, it's the ability to be able to reflect on the quality of your thinking, your own especially, and then that of others as well. So we need to have those skills to be able to detect the veracity of information, to be able to make good inferences from the information that we have. And so that's if that skill starts to atrophy, then we start to lose our ability to form true beliefs, and more importantly, perhaps also to have debiasing strategies that will help us deal with misinformation. Right, so to avoid errors, not just to be able to find the truth. And of course, truth is the foundation for trust. So that's another reason. And then finally, I think there's strategic implications. So if we rely on AI to be doing our strategic planning for us, or we start to over-rely on it, then essentially we're going to be in the situation where we're only thinking about what we can forecast, right? What can be inferred on the basis of existing information. But, you know, in an increasingly volatile and unpredictable world, you know, we can't often forecast where the future is going to go. We have to engage in strategic foresight. And strategic foresight is about identifying patterns before they become trends. It's that sort of creative projection of possible futures. It goes beyond what AI, at least currently, can produce. So I think strategically we're in a very dangerous space if we over-rely on AI. The future, as Yogi Berra said, is not what it used to be.
Well, continuing that stream around critical thinking and turning towards our student member of the panel, what changes would you like to see in how students interact with AI and how universities teach about AI?
Well, I think universities should be putting greater emphasis on how to work with AI and how to work with it critically. So you can just put your entire assignment into AI, which is what a lot of people are doing, and it'll spit you out something that seems pretty good. You know, I did a coding course in first year that I found incredibly difficult, but now you could just put that entire prompt into AI and get it perfect 7th grade instantly. I think students need to understand that there's greater value to going about it the hard way, and they need to understand how to engage with it in such a way that it isn't removing the actual learning portion from the assignments. We're focusing more on the getting there rather than the being there. And I think a way that universities can facilitate this is something that I have already seen a bit of what they're doing is switching to assignments that focus more on explaining the concepts behind it than showing you the actual product. So something that European universities do really well is oral exams, where you have to sit down and actually explain exactly why you did certain things, the path that you went down to make those decisions, and the concepts behind those decisions. Yeah, and I'm already seeing like that lots of courses are taking this, but I think definitely more imaginative ways of going about how we actually structure assessment itself is really important if we're going to be supporting students moving forward, keeping their critical thinking capacities and learning and being able to produce desired outcomes.
I think that's a perfect segue to Kelly. Kelly, a lot of the conversation about AI in the university is around cheating, around cheating on assessments. Instead of asking what actual learning looks like, do you want to comment on why you think that is? We're focusing so much on cheating and instead of, good learning outcomes.
I find the whole conversation about students cheating really, really boring. I appreciate why we focused on it. We have a national government regulator that has said the quality of our universities are under threat. We could be graduating students who haven't learned what they're supposed to learn because AI has done it for them. And they have done a really good job here of coming down on universities and saying, you need to make sure. Totally sensible. I agree. We should make sure, and we should know that. A couple months ago, I was in the UK. They're having a completely different conversation around AI, and they also have a regulator, but the regulator hasn't come down on this kind of rhetoric that students are cheating and therefore we need to start policing them. So it concerns me greatly when the focus becomes students are either cheaters or they're victims of bad education. And some of my colleagues in Melbourne did this research in the early days of AI coming out, and that's what they found the rhetoric largely fell into. I think it's become more sophisticated now. I think it comes down to such an important point that you said. It's about trust. How do we want to maintain trust between students and teachers within the university? And how does AI fit in with that? And I'll come to Jason's point as well. It came out actually in your point too. It's a perfect opportunity to ask ourselves, not about AI, but to say, what does learning look like now? And are we creating the environment for the type of learning that we would like to see with AI, without AI? But for me, it comes and calls back into question. We can either move down an avenue where we become the police officers in university, policing students to make sure that they have done it, or we can move in an environment that's actually, let's get into the process of learning. Let's be more collaborative and interactive in that process. So I do really, that's why I find the whole cheating conversation quite boring.
So you mentioned that in the media, in the discourse that you've been examining, really focus on cheating. So what do you think is missing in the conversation? What should we be talking about?
I think for me, one of the things that concerns me is whenever I hear students, and in the last 2 weeks, I've been doing data collection with students and academics and industry members for 4 different universities in multiple industries. And there's still students who are saying, I'm just told no. And I'm not meant to talk about it. I'm not meant to use it. I think we need to be having critical conversations with our students and modeling how you talk about how you use AI. What are the risks when you use it in certain ways? What are the opportunities? And to open that up so that students can feel included in the conversations. And one of the things I really loved about that process of co-design, bringing students into the conversation, students got so much out of it because so many of them are still left out of these conversations. They're just left on the side of shame, which is, I can't talk about it. Everybody's doing it, but I can't talk about it. And again, I worry about the relationship that actually creates between students and staff in the institution.
Thank you. So I think we can agree that we're seeing that AI is already shaping what we're doing in a variety of contexts. Really thinking about how is that influencing, students' future study, their careers. We have a mentee question around how people are thinking about their education and work or future. And a lot of people are thinking about that. So if we come back to the university context, I'll turn to Jason. One of the things you're known for is pointing out how quickly AI capabilities can grow. Can you tell us what aspects of university life or learning do you think might soon be so reshaped that in ways that we're not really expecting at the moment?
Yeah, I think we need to think very carefully, as Kelly was saying, about how we're teaching, how we're engaging with the students more broadly. But I've been thinking a lot about what the value proposition of universities are kind of in this era. Because if students can go online, ChatGPT just released a thing, study mode. Claude has one, Gemini has another one as well. So there's a lot of kind of pedagogical stuff built into these specialized modes that people can use on their own, and then also turn into any way that you want to interact with that information. So in my classes, we have quite nice readings the students can also listen to as an audiobook. They can turn it into videos, podcasts. The idea is you have this kind of central information that they're responsible for, but they can transform it in any way that they want to interact with that information. If they only have 30 minutes before a class, they could listen to it on a podcast as they come to class, right? So instead of kind of having this thing packaged in a way that the students have to interact with it in that particular way, depending on if they have 10 hours or 100 hours to engage with the content, they can engage with it in different ways. And I think we'll probably see a move in that direction, which does some very interesting things within the class, which is where I think we need to be as a university, is focusing more on the social end of things, right? Why are you here, right? Why would you come to class and not just learn stuff online? And I think we need to make that live experience much, much better, right? The environment you're in, the friends, networking, industry connections have industry come in and let us help them with the thorny problems that they're facing. And using these powerful tools to be able to make headway on them. I think that's probably the direction we should be moving in. But we'll see if we can get there.
Right. And one of the first questions I asked was how you're feeling, and we had a mix of optimism and anxiety and a feeling of okay. So one of the things that we've asked the audience is what are some of the concerns they have around using AI? And we have some around compliance, reduced ability to think actively. So we've talked about creative thinking, missing that creative thinking component, the ability to reflect and regard on different things. So let's turn a bit to concerns that you may have about AI. So Deborah, I'll start with you. Do you think that it's inevitable that our capacity for critical thinking will atrophy as Gen AI becomes more embedded in the knowledge work? We talked a little bit about that atrophy. Do you think that it's going to happen anyway?
Yeah, so I just picking up on some of the things that have just been said. So like Kelly, I think obsessing about assessment security is a bit of a mug's game, and it is boring. And there's much more exciting things, picking up from what Jason said, that we can be doing with AI to help students develop their critical and creative thinking capabilities. And going back to your point about the knowledge proposition the value proposition for a university. I mean, if you think about why universities were formed in the 10th century, they were essentially places where people went to learn how to become knowledge makers. So you would only graduate from a medieval university if you could make new contributions to knowledge. And I think that is still essentially the value proposition of a university, is we're producing that next generation of knowledge makers. So the task for us is then, how do we incorporate AI into our teaching so that we help deliver on that fundamental goal of university education? Critically, it has to connect with active learning. The dangers of cognitive offloading are that we just go into passenger mode. So if students are just using AI to get the information from a text, passively receive it, recall it, spit it out, or get the AI to spit it out into an essay, then we've lost it. We're essentially not doing what universities are supposed to do. But what I've been experimenting with lately, and this is really very nascent work, so I have no idea whether it's going to work, but trying to put the students in dialogue with the AI, in critical dialogue with the AI, where what they're doing is they're getting the AI to give them information, And then they're looking for the assumptions that the AI is making, and they're interrogating those assumptions. So it's essentially students sort of actively in dialogue with the AI. And I kind of actually got this idea from my son, who's doing a PhD at the Queensland Brain Institute. And I was saying, how can I, like use AI in this more active learning mode? And he said, well, think about data on the holodeck, right? So data sits down with Newton and Einstein and Stephen Hawking to have a discussion about space and so on. And like students are kind of in that position now where they can use AI to go into this holodeck and get the holodeck to impersonate somebody and have a conversation with these figures. And I teach the history of philosophy, and this is massive because these guys from the early modern period wrote millions of words, tens of millions of words. There's no way that a student can canvas that amount of literature. But, you get the AI to impersonate, say, René Descartes or Nicholas Malebranche, and then they can have a conversation with these dead guys. It only works for dead guys, I noticed. I tried to get it to impersonate Robert F. Kennedy so I could practice my critical thinking about the MMR vaccine and the connection with autism. But it refused for interesting grounds. One, was unethical to impersonate a living person. Second, that if it just stuck to what Robert F. Kennedy said, I wouldn't have enough information to practice my critical thinking with. Was enlightening. And then third, it didn't want the views of Kennedy to be associated with the company. I thought it's kind of interesting. They were all teachable moments, for me in terms of designing these this assessment. But I'm getting really positive responses from the students that they are finding that this critical engagement with AI is actually helping them to use it in a much more ethical and, I guess, active learning mode. And also, by the way, if you just put into your prompt, that you give to students, I want to practice my critical thinking, then you get a very different response than if you don't say that. So that to me is like where I get my optimism from. Yeah.
So there are more than just educational questions around AI. There's also the environmental impact. So I'm going to turn to you, Megan. In your view, could AI pose a significant challenge to addressing environmental issues like climate change? Or do you think that there are ways that it might, that we can mitigate, or ways that AI could support us in addressing these challenges?
Well, in short, yes, it definitely is posing a significant threat. That's probably the main reason I would say that I am anxious about this technology, because as it grows so exponentially, as you were saying before, it's so ingrained into everything that we do. And the problem with AI is that it uses a massive amount of water, electricity, and critical resources. So for water, for example, we've all heard the statistic that like every ChatGPT 3 prompt uses 500 mils of water. This is, just to think about it physically, to cool the absolutely gargantuan data centers that they build. See, AI isn't just like this intangible thing in the air, it's these massive data centers. Meta right now is building a data center that's the same size as Manhattan, and that's using huge amounts of critical minerals. The other one is that it's using an awful lot of electricity. So the electricity required to train a model is actually on average about 5 times, produces about 5 times the amount of emissions as the entire lifespan of a car. Every search using AI, people who use AI more like a search engine now than just a regular search engine, uses 5 times the amount of electricity as a regular search. Water, for example, all the water infrastructure in the world uses, all the AI infrastructure in the world uses 6 times the amount of water that the entirety of Denmark uses. It's reached such a ridiculous scale that I just can't see how it isn't going to affect our targets trying to get down to net zero. It's scary, to be honest. I'm quite scared of it. There's like counter arguments where, they say like, oh, well, now that we have AI, we can see trends in the data that we couldn't see before, and therefore identify loopholes to then continue to accelerate towards net zero. But I feel like it isn't enough to absorb the impact that it's creating. Yeah, I definitely think that's, yeah.
Are you positive at all that there might be some mitigation strategies that we might be able to adopt?
I think definitely the biggest the biggest priority of the companies that are making and generating these models should be efficiency. Should absolutely be efficiency, 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 and trying to get better with how we use these resources. I think that at the moment there isn't really the policy that's developed. Like, policy is very much slow to catch up to most things, and AI has been, you know, a brilliant example of this. It's just absolutely exploded in what feels like overnight to a lot of us, and like the policy hasn't caught up. There needs to be really firm regulations on how these companies are allowed to use resources, and this will actually create the incentive for them to do so, because right now there just really isn't an awful lot of incentive. There's more incentive to just get in right now while the market is just, you know, taking off. Yeah, I would love to be optimistic, and I'd love to say that I know lots of ways that we can mitigate it, but I don't right now. I think that as consumers, we definitely need to be more vocal in how we use AI and the companies that we support and the companies' approach to AI. Yeah, I hope that the technology will save us, but I'm not sure right now. Yeah.
Thinking a bit more broader about sustainability, and you know, we were talking earlier that not everyone has access to the same types of AI. Some are subscription, some are you know, low cost or free. Do you have any thoughts around, you know, students or people getting left behind from using AI and sort of that sustainability, from that sustainability perspective? Do you have any thoughts around that? Like, students you might know that may not have access to certain types of AI that other students do.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely poses an equity issue, which I hadn't even thought about. You mentioned that before, like some students might be using a much more developed model, which means that their outputs are better, which means that their assignments might be better. And that, you know, definitely creates like an equity issue. I think another issue is in disparity of our own personal morals. Like for me, I might take longer to do an assignment because I try and steer away from using AI, whereas people who are using it a lot more liberally would take not as long. I think that for students who want to not be left behind, but they're also nervous about overusing this technology, there's definitely ways that they can mitigate the way that they use AI. I think ways that I've seen online are definitely being very direct in the prompts that you use, very succinct, and keeping a backlog of prompts that you have actually made and generated responses that you've already created. So like, for example, if you're working on something and then like a week later you come back to it, you should have saved all the outputs from the prompts that you were using so you don't have to reproduce them. And then, yeah, I think also just on top of that, for students who do want to engage with them, but do want to engage with AI, but are worried about the ethical implications, absolutely holding the institutions and the companies that they use accountable. So, for example, one thing that we want to do with the Environment Collective is that we want to push the university to change all of their default browsers to Ecosia rather than Google, because Ecosia is the only search engine that I've found that doesn't just automatically have an AI generated response. It's kind of cutting out the unnecessary, I'd say, uses of AI and saving it for more necessary, which I do agree there's so many necessary uses of it, but cutting out just the general, like using it as a search engine and using it in ways that isn't necessarily helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Just staying on equity, I might turn to Kelly. You've been engaged with research, particularly with over 9,000 students across Australia. Thinking about equity or other things that have come out of those conversations or the research with students about AI, can you talk to us about what is coming out in terms of how students are using it, how they think about it, or anything around equity that you'd like to touch on?
First of all, I just want to double click on what you were saying there about sustainability and the environmental impacts. And I think the key thing there is when you mentioned, and I just learned something new, that gives me a bit of hope that in the university, we should be having these conversations that people can listen to other people's points of view, take on new information, and we really do keep ourselves to account. Think about the evidence, the information. So I really like how you did that. And one of the things in the research with students was many students are thinking in really nuanced ways about what it means to be a learner right now and how AI is changing that, impacting that. And they're trying to just navigate like we are What does this mean? How do I use it? Only for many of them, they don't have the opportunity to be in this type of a conversation, which seems crazy, right? Because we're in a university, but these are not a lot of conversations that are happening in classrooms. So a vast majority of students felt that they were not getting enough guidance. And the guidance is not going to be do this and don't do that. This is going to be something that requires critical thinking and engagement. There are going to be trade-offs in how you think about how you use it. It's not a technical problem to solve. It's an adaptive challenge. So I do think that that way of saying, how do we bring students into that conversation matters. Also, I think really important point, we did see when we looked across those populations, a lot of assumptions being challenged. A lot of people will say, people with disability, this is going to be great for them. Actually, for the students with disabilities, vast majority of them said, I'm very nervous about this actually. This is another thing that can take autonomy away from me. I don't. So again, challenging some of those assumptions and recognizing that we need to slow down and we need to have deeper conversations with lots of students, think about how we co-design and think through this together.
One of the things we asked on Menti was about the audience's ethical concerns. So we have a few things coming up about some of the concerns people are finding. So over-reliance on AI is the top concern. Privacy or data security, unethical use or development of AI, the environmental impacts that we've already talked about, copyright and intellectual property that might be coming from librarians. I know it's something that I think a lot about. So I just want to go down the line to our panel. What do you make of the ethical use of AI tools? And if some of them are ethically flawed, what should be our approaches to them? So I might start with you, Carol.
Yeah, I will say one of the things, and I didn't see it on the other list either, and it might have been there, and it's a broader ethics, but it comes to the point of what is the purpose of higher education now and into the future, and the value that learning is a social activity. And as we get more into not what can you produce, but how did you know that? Let's inquire together. One of the things I'm surprised not to see, which came out a lot in our research, was this concern about the impact it's going to have on social connections, about some students feeling like, I need the opportunity to actually collaborate with my peers. I need to know how to negotiate, have difficult conversations, and the emotional element that comes around this. It's a different challenge with AI and the emotions that brings. So I do think there's this risk of not dehumanization, but really thinking deeply about when you come to university, what do we teach you about engaging with other people? When knowledge is everywhere and everyone can go grab an answer, what does it mean to say, well, how do I understand you and how do we make a decision together then?
Right. Ethical concerns that you might have?
Yeah, on ethics, I think it's an interesting one. And I think it's all in flux at the moment. I mean, it's changing almost weekly in terms of these models. In terms of the environmental impacts, there's been a lot of work on that. And there's been a real shift by a lot of the tech companies to use local models that don't actually use the cloud. It runs on your laptop or on your phone. So it's not actually, you could unplug it from the internet and it still works. And so it's just maths, right? You're just feeding input in and it's transforming it and you get it out and you get intelligence out, which is weird. So you might see this, right? It might actually move kind of in this direction where a lot of the issues that people have with these ethical issues might go away very quickly. Another is publishing, right? And I'm seeing that. I mean, an interesting question is with many of our journal articles that we publish, they're in two formats currently, maybe three. You have an abstract, which is kind of a short version of the full paper, maybe some highlights or a plain English summary of the entire thing. But those are two forms of that entire full paper. I can imagine a future not so long from now where you can actually just have the raw data and then you can have a powerful model that just interrogates that data in different ways to be able to get the information out, right? So you can have it give you an abstract. You could have it give you a full 100-page report on exactly that same information, depending on what you want from it. So I think publishing is going to change dramatically. And again, this is kind of a short-term issue that we're talking about putting our existing published papers into the system and so on and having those kind of debates. But I think in just a few years, a lot of these issues are going to be completely different than they are now. So watch this space.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I'm really concerned about the environmental implications, and some of my students have actually opted out. I mean, they're conscientious objectors to using AI in some of the formative, work that we're doing in the classroom. And I go, well, that's fair enough, right? And I do think that it'd be interesting to see how that space evolves. I believe that DeepSeek actually uses less resources than other AI. So so there's issues about how you choose your, which AI to use. But I think just the other thing that sort of interests me is not falling into the trap of over-reliance. I mean, and not kind of buying into the hyperbole around AI. It's just a tool, right? It's like a pencil. It's like the lever. The lever and the fulcrum, one of the greatest tools we've ever had, right? You can move the heavy thing you couldn't move before. But tools should increase our power of acting, our self-efficacy. If we start relying on a tool to do our thinking for us, then, I think it's kind of game over. So we have to be very, I think, kind of deliberate and conscientious and critical in our use of AI and not fall into the efficiency trap. Not everything that's efficient is good. So we actually have to have a conversation about what ethics is and what is good in this space, what is in the public interest, what are the impacts of our using this technology on other people and communities and so on. I don't see enough of that conversation happening. So, yeah.
Megan, any last thoughts on ethics from you?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I think my main one is definitely like for the planet as somebody studying environmental engineering. Yeah, there's also some very interesting social implications. This is kind of different from what we were talking about before. Somebody who engages with the internet a lot, you're seeing the rise of AI chatbots that are replacing our friends, and what kind of implications does that have to have a friend that never questions you, that always agrees with you? How does that affect our wider relationships in the real world? But yeah,
Absolutely. We're going to move to questions from the floor, but before we do that, could I just ask Jason, if you fast forward 5 years into the future, what do you think is something that seems far-fetched now that could become routine at universities?
Yeah, interesting. I would say the kind of that vision I presented in terms of publishing, I think is going to change dramatically. But in fact, we posted a preprint this morning on something what we call automated general science. And so what we've done is this sounds far-fetched today, not even in 5 years, an entire autonomous workflow from the generation of the idea to the design of the experiment, the collection of the data. This is within a social science sort of context with visual working memory and mental rotation and things like that, to analyzing those data, all the way to producing a published manuscript. So we've generated, as part of the paper, the preprint, three publishable papers that are alongside it. And that process is just going to get better and faster, which I think raises a lot of issues, particularly within the university context. What does that mean for how we do what we do, how we do science? But it also kind of, in thinking about the big ideas that we can chase when a lot of this sort of stuff is taken care of as well. So freeing us up to focus on coming up with the big ideas in the first place, rather than all of the details of publishing and even analyzing the data. And so I think it's going to change. It's going to change dramatically in 5 years.
Amazing. Well, we'll take some questions from the audience. We'll start with the question that's on the screen. But if any of our audience members have any questions, you want to raise your hand, Sarah here has a microphone. So we'll start with the first question on the screen. How can higher education institutions establish healthy guardrails around the procurement and use of AI amongst student, research, and staff cohorts? Anyone want to take that question? Kelly, do you want to kick us off?
I think this is actually a really important question and incredibly difficult, because AI is something that every person can have and has access to in different ways. And we talked about the equity issues. It does pose a different question as an institution, for any institution in a company, do you then try to create something where you try to say, no, this is the model that we'll use? Maybe you could do that with staff at work, but I don't see for students, because they have the capability to select so many models, that is a way forward in a sensible way. What I would say, though, for higher education institutions is it would be really useful if they could take a stand and they could come up with some safe within the university. You can play with this. You know, the data isn't going to go anywhere. Things you might be worried about, we put the guardrails around that. And you know, you have that safe space. Then people could choose to use that. But I do think when it comes to students, my sense is, and from just talking to Jason before we started, you're going to find the right model to do the right thing. And that's going to keep shifting. I don't think that we're going to become kind of one AI to them all. So I'm not sure the idea of trying to procure the right one is the way forward. Thinking about, though, how we ensure that students not only can afford and get access to good models, but also that they get the training to know how to use it well. That is something I do worry about. And I think there's lots of things we already do in institutions to support students. And that's something we just need to put in place into the future. We have a, you can't get a laptop, come get a laptop from us. It should be, you can't get an AI, come get an AI funding from us. And here's the training to go with it.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone want to raise their hands? Then we'll go to the next question on screen. So how do you think the massive spread of AI slop online will affect the overall quality of the broader information environment? Will it be harder in the future to find quality information and resources? Anyone want to?
I'll say something about that. I mean, this has been said by others as well, but AI is, fits the definition of a bullshitter perfectly. So, bullshit is a technical term, and it's worse than lying, because the person who lies at least has a concern can tell the difference between truth and falsity. They're just uttering falsehoods or what they want you to believe, even though they don't themselves believe it. But a bullshitter doesn't care about truth or falsity at all. We'll just say what's expedient. And an AI, doesn't have any concern for the truth, right? There's nothing there. It's just going to sort of spit out information that's there, or, perform inductive inferences on it. It will get kind of better and better at that. All right. Remember the early days of Wikipedia, how unreliable Wikipedia was, and through crowdsourcing, it's got kind of better and better. But we have to always bear in mind that it's, it doesn't have that drive towards the truth, right? And that's something that I think has to always be brought into mind. So we have to be able to ensure that people are able to provide the right kind of critical oversight into the outputs of AI. And I think for that, I'm going to go back to the importance of critical thinking. If you look at this, how over-reliance on AI is negatively correlated with critical thinking, the people who already have good critical thinking skills to begin with are those who don't fall prey to this kind of the dangers of cognitive offloading. So part of our strategy as an institution is to provide that training for students, in the critical engagement with information, media literacy, critical thinking, so that they can interact effectively with AI in this space, and also to model how to use AI in a way that doesn't just put somebody in passenger mode, but actually keeps their critical engagement with the information being spat out. Otherwise, we're just going to be prey to the bullshit.
Well, just to add on to that, when you said drive to the truth, it kind of made me think, does AI almost have a drive towards misinformation? Because obviously a lot of these models train off the internet, and there's been all these controversies where it's been training off Reddit and The Onion and all sorts, but as it trains off the internet, I know there was the you should eat 1 to 3 small rocks a day post that was all over the place. I saw that one a bunch. That's quite funny. But yeah, as the internet does become more and more made out of content that is generated by AI, then models are training on that content. Does that almost kind of accelerate us in the other direction, where sources will just become further and further from the truth as they become like a game of Chinese whispers almost? Is that something that you guys are worried about? Or
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
yeah.
I would say no. I mean, all of the evidence with the latest models, you can look at the hallucination rates and they're going down dramatically. What you're talking about, both in terms of the eating rocks example and yeah, a lot of the other examples with the early models. Yeah, they were kind of early demonstrations of where these things can go awry, and we're very sensitive to the training data. But now we have what's called reasoning models, the ones that are actually using chains of thought in arriving and deriving an answer. DeepSeek is one that they're using. That was kind of the first exposure the world got to these sort of chain of reasoning sorts of things, but they're becoming more and more sophisticated in terms of how they reason. And instead of just spewing bullshit with a single prompt, garbage in, garbage out, they actually spew something out, use that information, reflect on that information, feed it into another model, a supervisor model that looks at that information and so on. So they're less chatbots and more systems that, with these more modern models that are being developed. And so you can see these hallucination rates just dropping dramatically. And in fact, they seem to be outperforming many human experts in many domains as well. Diagnostic medicine we're seeing as well, and humans are kind of relying on humans in some respects to their own detriment, because the models are vastly outperforming humans in many of these domains. So we have to think very carefully about when we should use it and when we shouldn't, where they can outperform us and when they're not, when they are bullshitting. And so again, the answer is not ignorance. The answer is absolutely to keep track of what's happening in these areas so you can make an informed judgment.
And they do engage in crowdsourcing as well, a bit, like the Wikipedia model. So it's, I find when I'm engaging with AI, it's constantly asking me, what do you think about this, right? So, having a conversation with it about what critical thinking is. And I have noticed the improvement too. So last year I was like, it can't do conditional arguments. I've got it. And of course, now it can do conditional arguments. It's like, dang, that's one thing that's improved on. But what has to be said is that, it is very good it's become very good at deductive inferences and validity checking and so on. But it is, within its own little echo chamber, right? It cannot gauge the soundness of an argument. It cannot tell you whether its premises are true or false. It cannot get outside its black box. So I think we still need that sort of human oversight and that engagement, with the world to, to detect its out, whether its outputs are true or not.
I think we'll take one more question. Just checking with the audience to see if there is one question here.
Hi there. I was playing around with Copilot over the last few days, using it as a Socratic tutor, just seeing what it would do. And it's very complimentary. It thinks that I'm really insightful, have great points. So I'm kind of thinking, all right, this is going to become a very addictive sort of thing for a lot of people. And I think people have already been noticing how addictive it's becoming. I was wondering if anybody's thought about this.
I have a PhD student who's working on exactly this topic, actually. She's looking at what we call sycophantic AI, the ones that are actually complementing you. And in fact, you just saw recently when OpenAI moved from their 4.0 model, which was very sycophantic and just complimentary and telling you that you're a genius, even though you're putting in just slop. And they've moved to 5, which was much more abrupt and less complimentary. And they saw a massive backlash among the public. Right, and to the extent that they actually had to, they replaced 4.0 and went with 5, and just said, "Yep, that's all you're getting." And people absolutely, there's a massive backlash, and so they've had to come back and now release a legacy model so they can still access 4.0 in its complementary sort of way. But it's a real issue, and a lot of the issues that we've raised here in terms of combating the sort of tendency to just have it do stuff for you, versus putting it in study mode where it's actually helping you think through things. And I think the market is probably going to determine which direction that goes. And my fear is exactly that it's going to be in terms of sycophancy. People are going to want the one that makes them feel good and that produces answers straight away, and not the one that makes them think and plays the devil's advocate and kind of interrogates you. that might not be a great model in terms of profit. And what do we do about that? Is a real question. I don't know.
I'm going to add to that. I think the opportunity that we have is to say, as a university, what is our responsibility to the society in terms of who we graduate and what they know about AI? So I love the idea, again, having this conversation. I think every student who graduates from UQ should be able to have this conversation and to recognize that and to know that it's in there. At the moment, and this gives me hope, our students trust us. They trust us more than they trust AI. They know AI can't be trusted, but they find it useful. And we asked a question about feedback. About 4,000 students said, yes, I use it for feedback. And it was really helpful. I didn't trust it, but it was still helpful to me. But I still want the teacher's feedback. They do different things, and I want both of them. If the trust that students have and society starts to have in universities, that we're not graduating people who can answer that question and say, oh, I recognize what's going on here. I know how to keep up with this. I can ask the right question to understand, should I trust that or not? That's where I think we get into trouble. We've got the trust and the opportunity that we've got to say, how do we make sure we maintain that? And what do we actually want from our graduates when it comes to their AI know-how and competence and smarts?
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. That has gone by so quickly. Could you please join me in thanking our wonderful panel? Thank you for your time, for your insights, and for the very thoughtful contributions. These kinds of conversations help us navigate this evolving role of AI in education. And as you said, they're just beginning. We need to do more of them. So if you would like to explore these topics further, the library has a range of resources on AI, including the AI Student Hub. So if anyone hasn't looked at the AI Student Hub, it's there for students. There's also an AI Teachers Hub that's there for teaching staff. And I know that there's going to be coming something like HDR and Researcher Hub in the near future. So keep your eyes out for that. The library also does several workshops on AI. So if you're a student or a staff member, please have a look at the library's website. There's some upcoming library workshops on the screen there. Register and to continue these conversations around what AI is, how to use AI, and how we can leverage it. Finally, thank you to everyone who joined us today, both in person and online. We hope you have found the discussion valuable and thought-provoking. I know we didn't all agree on everything, but that's all right. If you have a chance, please take a moment to complete the mentee feedback survey. We'd really like to know your thoughts. I also want to thank the library staff who put this event on. So thanks very much to all the staff members. And I just want to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.